23 hours alone. The mental effects of solitary confinement. Imagine a small cell no larger than a parking space. One cot, a metal toilet, four walls closing in. No sunlight. No conversation. No human touch. For 23 hours a day, sometimes stretching into weeks, months, or even years, a person is left entirely alone. The American Psychological Association warns that this level of isolation is psychologically harmful, especially for those with pre-existing mental health conditions. Anxiety, panic attacks, depression, paranoia, hallucinations, and cognitive disturbances are common. Experts agree, extended solitary confinement is not just uncomfortable, it can actively break the human mind. Globally, the practice is seen as extreme. In 2011, UN Special Rapporteur E. Mendez labeled prolonged solitary confinement a potential form of torture and recommended no one be held alone for more than 15 days. Yet in the United States, tens of thousands of prisoners spend months, even years, in cells under conditions that would shock any outside observer. Statistics from the Urban Institute reveal that at any given time, roughly 80,000 to 100,000 people are in solitary confinement in U.S. prisons. The Vera Institute of Justice reports that prisoners in isolation are 6.9 times more likely to engage in self-harm than those in the general population, and post-release mortality rates are significantly higher. This is not a distant horror story. It is a lived reality for thousands of people, a world where the mind becomes both prisoner and battlefield. If you're intrigued by the hidden world inside ADX Florence, make sure to hit like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to follow this journey through the mental effects of solitary confinement prison in America. This documentary contains descriptions of prison conditions and violence for educational purposes. Viewer discretion is advised. The walls close in. The first days in solitary are deceptively quiet. The cell is bare, the air stagnant. Guards deliver meals through a slot, sometimes without a word. There is no meaningful human interaction. Even in these early days, psychological changes begin to appear. According to the APA, individuals in isolation often experience heightened anxiety and emotional dysregulation. Thoughts spiral. Sleep patterns falter. Small tasks feel monumental. The brain, starved of social stimulation, starts to perceive threats where there are none. Hallucinations can begin, a mind constructing company out of shadows. For those already struggling with mental health, the effects accelerate. Depression can take hold within days. The Vera Institute notes that rates of self-harm rise dramatically even during the first week in solitary. Suicide risk becomes alarmingly higher, not in abstract numbers but in lived experience. Prisoners describe feeling trapped inside their own skulls, with the walls of the cell mirroring the walls of their minds. The isolation is not only psychological. Physical health begins to deteriorate as well. Lack of sunlight and exercise can weaken bones, lower immunity, and exacerbate pre-existing conditions. The Urban Institute emphasizes that the consequences extend beyond the prison walls. Post-release, individuals often carry trauma that can affect every aspect of daily life, from employment to social relationships. By the end of the first week, the prisoner is no longer just alone. They are fundamentally changed. The mind begins to adapt to confinement, but adaptation comes at a cost. Cognitive clarity fades. Emotional resilience diminishes. The human spirit, in its extreme form, begins to fracture. Descent into the mind. Weeks turn into months. The cell remains unchanged, yet the prisoner's mind is no longer the same. What began as anxiety and frustration evolves into something far darker: paranoia, hallucinations, and cognitive disintegration. The American Psychological Association warns that extended isolation can produce a profound sense of unreality and perceptual distortions. Shadows stretch across walls, sounds echo in imagined patterns, and time loses all meaning. Prisoners often report feeling as if the world outside the cell has vanished completely, a disconnection that is more than emotional, it is neurological. This is not rare. According to the Urban Institute, the vast majority of individuals in solitary experience deterioration of mental health. Depression intensifies. panic attacks become frequent. Cognitive skills such as memory, attention, and problem-solving degrade. Simple tasks, reading, writing, organizing thoughts, become monumental challenges. The Vera Institute's research highlights the most extreme consequences. Prisoners in solitary are 6.9 times more likely to self-harm, and their risk of suicide skyrockets. Many report a sense of being trapped in an unending cycle of fear and despair, with no visible escape. Even minor infractions can extend the period of isolation, reinforcing the sense of hopelessness. Beyond mental anguish, solitary has profound physiological consequences. Limited mobility, absence of natural light, and irregular sleep disrupt circadian rhythms. The immune system weakens, and chronic stress begins to affect every organ system. In some cases, post-release studies indicate higher rates of cardiovascular problems, substance abuse, and early mortality. International human rights standards underscore the danger of this practice. Juan E. Mendez, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, warned that confinement beyond 15 days is tantamount to psychological torture. Yet in U.S. prisons, stays lasting months or even years are common. For many prisoners, the walls are not just a physical barrier but a psychological trap from which they cannot escape. The human cost. Behind the statistics are real people. Men and women whose lives have been forever altered by prolonged solitary confinement. The ACLU documents countless cases where individuals, even after minor infractions, are placed in isolation for months, sometimes years, with devastating consequences. Take, for example, prisoners diagnosed with pre-existing mental illnesses. The American Psychological Association highlights that these individuals are disproportionately placed in solitary, where their conditions worsen rapidly. Anxiety becomes panic. Depression deepens into despair. Hallucinations distort reality. In some documented cases, inmates begin hearing voices or seeing figures that aren't there, a manifestation of sensory deprivation and extreme isolation. Self-harm and suicide are tragically common. The Vera Institute reports that inmates in solitary are nearly 7 times more likely to harm themselves than those in the general prison population. Even after release, many carry the scars of isolation. Post-release mortality rates are significantly higher, and reintegration into society becomes a monumental struggle. Jobs, families, and social relationships, all are affected by the trauma inflicted behind the walls. The physical consequences mirror the mental toll. Lack of exercise and sunlight leads to weakened bones, vitamin deficiencies, and cardiovascular stress. Sleep disturbances and chronic stress alter hormonal balances, weakening the immune system. In many ways, the body becomes a reflection of the mind, fragile, strained, and vulnerable. International standards emphasize the severity of these effects. UN Special Rapporteur Juan E. Mendez warned that solitary confinement beyond 15 days is a form of torture, yet thousands in the United States are routinely held far beyond this limit. This is not just a legal or procedural problem, it is a profound human rights issue. Even beyond the cells, the consequences ripple outward. Families, communities, and the criminal justice system itself bear the cost of individuals whose mental and physical health have been irreparably damaged. The American Civil Liberties Union notes that overuse of solitary contributes to recidivism, making rehabilitation far more difficult and undermining the very purpose of the justice system. Survivors of solitary confinement speak of the enduring psychological trauma. Memories of the endless walls, the silence, and the absence of human contact linger long after release. They describe difficulty trusting others, chronic anxiety, and an ongoing struggle with depression. For many, the mind continues to fight a battle long after the cell door has opened. Reform and the future. The devastating impact of solitary confinement has not gone unnoticed. Organizations like the ACLU, the Vera Institute, and human rights bodies are actively documenting the harms and pushing for reform. Their goal is clear: reduce or eliminate prolonged isolation, protect vulnerable populations, and create safer, more humane correctional systems. In several states, legal challenges have successfully limited the use of solitary for juveniles, individuals with serious mental illnesses, and pregnant women. Case studies documented by the ACLU reveal that even small policy changes, limiting the number of hours in a cell, providing structured social interaction, and improving access to mental health care, can significantly reduce the psychological harm associated with isolation. Experts advocate for step-down programs, where prisoners are gradually reintegrated from restrictive housing into the general population, rather than being released suddenly into society. These programs help mitigate the shock to the mind and reduce the risk of post-release self-harm or recidivism. The Vera Institute of Justice emphasizes that solitary should be a last resort, not the default solution. Prison administrators are encouraged to implement alternatives such as behavioral therapy and counseling for individuals with mental health issues, structured social interaction and group programs to maintain cognitive and emotional stability, enhanced recreational opportunities and outdoor access to reduce sensory deprivation. International human rights frameworks provide additional guidance. UN Special Rapporteur Juan E. Mendez continues to stress that prolonged solitary confinement is a form of torture, and policies should reflect a strict 15-day limit. Governments and correctional institutions that have adopted these standards report improved mental health outcomes, decreased incidence of self-harm, and safer prison environments overall. Yet, challenges remain. Solitary is often used as a tool for managing overcrowding, controlling prison populations, or punishing minor infractions. The culture of isolation persists despite decades of research showing its harm. Reform advocates argue that meaningful change requires both policy and cultural shifts. Correctional officers, policymakers, and the public must recognize that solitary confinement is not just a disciplinary tool, it is a public health issue, a human rights issue, and a moral issue. The future of prison reform, according to the ACLU and Vera Institute, lies in evidence-based approaches, reducing solitary confinement, expanding mental health services, and creating systems that rehabilitate rather than punish. For those currently trapped in isolation, every hour of reform matters. Each hour outside the cell, each small interaction, and each structured program offers a chance to reclaim their mind, their dignity, and their humanity. The final truth. Solitary confinement is often described as a punishment, a way to control dangerous behavior within prison walls. But the evidence is clear. It is far more than that. It is a mental and physical assault, a prolonged deprivation that can change the very structure of a person's mind and body. The American Psychological Association reports that even short-term isolation can trigger severe psychiatric symptoms, and prolonged confinement can push an individual into a state of psychological crisis. Anxiety, depression, paranoia, and hallucinations are not rare side effects. They are the expected outcome. The Vera Institute confirms that those held in solitary are almost 7 times more likely to engage in self-harm and face significantly higher risks of suicide. Post-release, the trauma continues. Survivors struggle with reintegration, relationships, employment, and trust in society. They leave prison, but the prison has not left them. Yet the story is not solely one of despair. Reform efforts led by the ACLU, the Vera Institute, and human rights organizations demonstrate that change is possible. Policies limiting the use of solitary, structured step-down programs, and increased access to mental health care have shown measurable improvements in prisoner outcomes. International standards, like the UN Special Rapporteur's 15-day limit, provide a moral and legal framework to guide reforms worldwide. But change requires awareness. It requires the public, lawmakers, and prison administrators to recognize that solitary confinement is not merely a disciplinary tool, it is a public health crisis and a human rights violation. Every day that an individual spends in 23 hours of isolation is a day where their mind is under siege, where the walls close in not only physically but psychologically. The final truth is stark. The damage of solitary confinement is deep, lasting, and often invisible, yet it is preventable. Reform, compassion, and science offer a path forward. By understanding the mental effects of solitary, we can advocate for a justice system that protects the safety, dignity, and humanity of all individuals, even those behind bars. Solitary confinement is not inevitable. It is a choice, and it is a choice we can change. The world inside solitary confinement is harsh, often invisible, and deeply human. We've seen the psychological toll, the physical strain, and the long-lasting scars it leaves on those trapped behind the walls. If you want to continue uncovering the hidden truths of prisons, justice, and the human mind, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Join our community, turn on notifications, and don't miss our next deep dive into the untold stories of the world behind bars. Your support helps us shine a light on these stories and bring awareness to issues that affect real people every day. Stay curious, stay informed, and remember, knowledge is the first step toward change.